This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We have a roundtable to talk about what's happening in Brussels, Belgium. Here in New York, we're joined by Joshua Hersh, who reported from Brussels following the Paris attacks in November, wrote a piece headlined, "What They Missed, the Anti-Terror Raid That Asked All the Wrong Questions." At the time, he was the BuzzFeed News Michael Hastings Fellow. Well, what did they miss?
Well, that was a particular story about a raid that took place in a town in eastern Belgium in January of last year. And it was right in the aftermath of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And so it didn't really get a lot of attention at the time. But what I did is I went back and looked at it, and I noticed that the description of it, the reporting on it, the way that the prosecutor talked about it, fit with the pattern that we tend to hear about these raids. Somebody who's a psychopath of some sort, who goes to Syria, who returns back to Brussels. He's a very Islamist radical, and he wants to blow himself up and kill everyone. And that made some sense, but there was a third guy in that house. And they grouped him together in that category, but he didn't really fit there. He seemed to be someone who he had never gone to Syria. Everyone I met said he wasn't radicalized at all. Some people said he may have had no idea what he was doing there, but I think more likely...
And this was which raid?
This was a raid in a town called Verviers, where they killed everyone except him, and this guy jumped out the window, and the prosecutor conceded that he didn't seem prepared to die like the other two.
And they killed everyone in a fierce firefight, right?
Really, I mean, and you may have heard about the firefight in Saint-Denis after the attacks in Paris. It was exactly the same thing. I mean, it was a many minutes long
But this
battle.
was after Charlie Hebdo.
This is after Charlie Hebdo, so it was much earlier. And what I realized is that people like this guy seem to exist. They come up all the time in these attacks. They're people who play kind of smaller support roles, who have connections to the people who we think of as the terrorists through childhood, through growing up in the neighborhoods together, through petty criminality. But they aren't terrorists in the way we think of it. And if we realize that actually those are the people we need to focus on, it helps us to understand that the foundation for the terrorism structure that exists in cities like Brussels and in Paris, of people who are going abroad and coming back, it's maybe much more mundane than the sort of high rhetoric we hear about people trying to defeat democracy and they hate our freedoms and things like that. It's actually people who exist within a sort of lower spectrum of local grievances and criminality and things that actually are maybe easier to deal with, but also more complicated to try to understand.
And this neighborhood in Molenbeek that we've heard so much about now in recent months, and it's quite distinct from other Arab or Muslim neighborhoods in Europe in that it's right in the center of Brussels, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Geographically, it's just 2 metro stops away from the central station, which was striking to me because I'm used to thinking of the suburbs in Paris, which are really isolated geographically. Molenbeek is right in the middle of the city, more or less, but it's still really isolated, and the people who grow up there will tell you that they feel like they can't really access other parts of the city. The other parts of the city feel like a foreign land to them. They can't get apartments there. They can't really get jobs in other places. And so I spoke to one young man who lived there who told me, he said, people always say that we refuse to leave, we refuse to integrate. And he said, that's not the case. We're not allowed to integrate. We're not allowed to go elsewhere.
Explain what he meant. This is Mohammed? This
is Mohammed, yeah. And he was, I think, characteristic of some of the people. Mohammed was in the piece I wrote. And he was describing how, among other things, for example, this is a young man who's very well educated. He's very smart. He's studying at one of the higher colleges in the city and actually was able, through his education, to get out. He's, I think, the only non-white Belgian in his school. And he still feels like he could never really be Belgian when he's at school. He had a job that was working in a department store, and he told me that it was the best job he could get. I mean, he tried for years to get another job, despite his education, and he speaks English, he speaks French. And at this job, he was responsible for folding clothes and cleaning up, and the people he worked with refused to learn his name. They would just call him worker. And this was a daily reflection of how distant he was always going to be from society.
Well, I wanted to take that a little further. What is it that, from what you've been able to see in terms of the particular social and political realities of Belgium that has made it such a hotbed for the development of radicalized Muslim fighters now?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, Belgium, one of the things that happens in Western Europe that we don't deal with quite as much here in the U.S., although we have our faults, but integration is really hard to pull off in some of these countries in Western Europe, and it has to do with this very strong sense of identity that these countries bring to the table. So when you arrive from North Africa, or when you're the child or grandchild of people who arrive from North Africa, which is really more often the case, you find yourself butting up against this reality that you just can't be considered Belgian. It happens in France. It's going to happen quite a lot, I think, in Germany. And that creates a real tension, and it creates a sense of the ceiling of opportunity for you is rather low. And I think that ultimately got exploited by people. I mean, we have to remember early in the war in Syria, many people were going off to Syria to fight, and it was before ISIS. It wasn't about radicalization. It was actually, I think, to some extent welcomed by the Belgian government, which by its policy supported the rebels against Assad. It was welcomed by the French government. They sort of turned a blind eye. So you had a huge number of people going rather freely, and that created an opening for people who wanted to exploit it.
I wanted to bring Yasser Louati into this conversation, who's a spokesperson for the Collective Against Islamophobia in France. Talk about your response to what just took place. We had you on after the attacks of November in France, and your response to what's happened over these last months, particularly to the Arab community of France.
Hi, Amy. It's again a feeling of déjà vu. It's this, I've been following the news with the Brussels attacks, and it is the exact same feeling. Shock and horror, people crying, people dead. And then we have politicians, trying to advance their agenda on the bodies of our victims. And again, now we are facing the same problem, and we still refuse to address the question. Why do these things keep happening? What would make someone hate his or her country so much to the point of acting on behalf of a foreign terrorist organization? So now the feeling is that the governments, I can speak for the French government, especially 4 months after the November attacks, is not doing what should be done and addressing the root causes of terrorism. And every single guest, on your program that spoke before me spoke about them. As long as you have foreign domination, imperialistic wars, social injustice, exclusion, strong identity against the minorities, etc., you will definitely push one of the weakest elements in the hands of these terrorist groups. And you don't need 1,000 of them. 1 or 2 are enough, and Brussels was just a plain demonstration of it.
And in terms of what you expect now, considering what happened after the attacks in Paris, in terms of dragnets and raids in the Muslim community, what's your fears?
We hope the Belgian government will not act like the French government did, meaning brutality against the Muslim population and holding it responsible directly or indirectly for what happened. So far, the Belgian government is sending positive signals, and we hope that it won't go down the path of state brutality against minorities. To give you a clear example of the French failures in the aftermath of the November 13th attacks, so far, after 4 months, 3,400 raids have been carried against homes, mosques, Muslim restaurants, etc., in total brutality, with the willingness to humiliate people. In the end, only 4 or 5 inquiries have been opened on terror charges. This means that for 4 months you have been terrorizing innocent people and holding them accountable for your own failures. So I hope the Belgian government will look at the French failures and take another path, meaning that, showing more solidarity, more unity in the face of a common threat.